The African Union, AU, a seat of power or a symbol of compromise. The imperative case for relocating the African Union headquarters from Ethiopia, by three dimensions view. A legacy forged in Pan-African fire. The African Union, AU, stands as the monumental successor to the Organization of African Unity, OAU, conceived in the fiery crucible of Pan-Africanism and the struggle for liberation. Its founding mission to promote unity, solidarity, and self-determination across the continent was a direct response to centuries of colonial subjugation. The choice of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as its headquarters in 1963 was profoundly symbolic. Ethiopia, famously uncolonized, though not untouched by foreign invasion, represented a beacon of African independence and sovereignty. Emperor Haile Selassie's diplomatic prowess secured this status, embedding the continent's premier institution within a narrative of resistance. However, the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century bears little resemblance to that of the post-independence era. The symbolic capital of Addis Ababa's location has, over decades, been eroded by a complex web of practical compromises, internal Ethiopian crises, and persistent foreign influence. This analysis argues that for the African Union to authentically fulfill its mandate of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens, a bold and necessary step must be taken: the relocation of its headquarters to a more neutral, stable, and forward-looking nation. 1. The erosion of Ethiopian neutrality and stability. The foundational principle for hosting an international organization is the host nation's stability and political neutrality. Ethiopia, under its current leadership, fails on both counts. Internal conflict and humanitarian crisis. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's tenure, beginning with hopeful Nobel Peace Prize recognition, has devolved into a period of intense internal strife. The devastating civil war in Tigray, 2020-2022, which spilled into conflicts in Amhara and Oromia, resulted in widespread atrocities, human rights violations, and a staggering humanitarian disaster. Hosting the continent's primary peace and security body in a nation actively grappling with such severe internal conflict represents a profound contradiction that undermines the African Union AU's moral authority and credibility. A question of host nation influence. The concentration of diplomatic power in one capital inherently grants that host nation undue influence. Ethiopia has historically, and continues to, leverage its host status for diplomatic advantage. This creates an inherent power imbalance where the secretariat of a union of 55 nations is physically and politically situated within the sphere of a single member state. This proximity can stifle candid criticism of Ethiopia's internal policies and its foreign adventures in the Horn of Africa, potentially biasing African Union mediation efforts and decision-making. 2. The stranglehold of foreign influence and donor diplomacy. Perhaps the most potent argument for relocation is the pervasive influence of external powers, which is facilitated by the current location. The Addis Ababa ecosystem. Addis Ababa is not just the African Union's home. It is a hive of foreign embassies, intelligence agencies, and NGOs. This creates an environment where diplomatic lobbying, back-channel pressure, and economic coercion are a constant feature. Major donors to the African Union, particularly the European Union, China, and the United States, who fund a significant portion of the AU's programmatic budget, maintain a powerful presence that can unduly shape agendas and resolutions to serve their interests rather than Africa's. The compromised, impartial, mediator, Ethiopia's own government is deeply enmeshed in relationships with these foreign powers, often relying on their economic and political support. This makes it an ineffective and compromised neutral ground for discussing critical continental issues that often involve resisting that very foreign interference. For the African Union to be a truly independent arbiter, whether on conflicts in the Sahel, trade negotiations with the EU, or dealing with great power competition between the US, China, and Russia, it must operate from a base less susceptible to this intense, concentrated external pressure. 3. Symbolism for a new African generation. The original symbolism of Addis Ababa is outdated. The narrative of the uncolonized nation, while historically important, does not represent the aspirations of a modern, dynamic, and future-oriented Africa. Beyond historical legacies, Africa's challenges and opportunities are no longer defined solely by the anti-colonial struggle. They are defined by economic integration, AfCFTA, technological leapfrogging, climate change, and youth empowerment. The headquarters of the African Union should reflect this new identity. Relocating to a nation recognized for its democratic stability, economic innovation, and commitment to Pan-African values would send a powerful message. The African Union is ready to shed the vestiges of the past and embrace a proactive, self-reliant future. Decentralizing Pan-Africanism, keeping the African Union AU's central institution in its original location reinforces an East African-centric view of Pan-Africanism. The liberation was a continental effort, and the future should be a continental project. Moving the headquarters would democratize the sense of ownership among all regions from the economic powerhouses of West Africa to the southern tip of the continent. It would physically manifest the principle that no single nation owns or dominates the African project. 4. Logistical and bureaucratic inefficiencies. On a practical level, hosting the African Union AU in a nation with recurring political instability creates significant operational challenges. Security and functionality. Periods of intense conflict in Ethiopia have led to disruptions, internet blackouts, and security lockdowns that hamper the daily functioning of the African Union Commission. An international organization of this stature requires uninterrupted operation, guaranteed connectivity, and a secure environment for diplomats and staff from across the continent and the world. Diplomatic immunities and freedoms. There have been recurring reports of tensions between the Ethiopian government and the African Union regarding diplomatic protocols, privileges, and immunities for African Union staff and representatives. Relocating to a nation with a stronger and more ingrained tradition of respecting international diplomatic norms would eliminate these frictions and ensure the African Union AU's operational independence. A proposal for a new home. Criteria for selection. The selection of a new headquarters must be based on transparent, merit-based criteria to avoid regional political wrangling. The ideal host nation should exemplify political stability, a proven record of democratic governance, peaceful transitions of power, and respect for human rights. Neutrality, a foreign policy that is non-aligned in continental disputes and has minimal baggage in regional conflicts. Infrastructure, world-class transportation links, reliable utilities, especially electricity and internet, and modern conference facilities. Pan-African commitment, a demonstrable commitment to African integration, evidenced by ratification of key instruments and active, constructive engagement in African Union programs. Symbolic value, a nation that represents Africa's future, be it through economic innovation, cultural diversity, or democratic maturity. Potential candidates could include nations like Ghana, the birthplace of Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-African vision, Rwanda, a hub of technology and efficiency, Botswana, a long-standing model of stability and democracy, or Tanzania, a historical leader in liberation movements and a symbol of neutrality. Reclaiming the African project. The relocation of the African Union headquarters from Addis Ababa is not an act of hostility towards Ethiopia. It is, rather, a necessary surgical procedure to ensure the health and future of the entire continental body. It is about divorcing the institution's operational and symbolic existence from the political fortunes of a single member state and the intense vortex of foreign influence that surrounds it. True liberation is not just political independence. It is economic, intellectual, and institutional self-determination. For the African Union to be the catalyst for this liberation, it must first itself be liberated. Moving its physical home is the most profound symbolic and practical step towards building an African Union that is truly for Africans, by Africans, and free from the compromising shadows of the past. It is time to build a new headquarters that doesn't just remember African history but actively architects its future. National interest.
This African Union now. There is no time to waste. We must unite or we perish.